Nicole, are you going to mute everyone, or shall I ask everyone to mute themselves?
If everyone doesn't mind muting, I'll go through and mute if we have anyone missed.
Okay, so we are going to mute you guys just to make just to have a safe and quiet presentation, and then we will take the questions after that. So today we have Donna Ogle with us. Dr. Ogle is an assistant professor of computer science and joined Rockford University in the fall semester of 2018. She has over 25 years of experience teaching both graduate and undergraduate classes. She began her career as a programmer, systems designer, and a manager in large computer systems development. She has also done corporate training both on-site and in the classroom. Dr. Ogle's area of research include big data, social media analytics, social network analysis, organization development, AI, technology in the workspace. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ogle. Dr. Ogle, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to see such a diverse group here. I see student, I see fellow professors, people in my department, AAUW, American Association of University Women. So thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, I titled this Artificial Intelligence 101, Will the Robots Take Our Jobs? I didn't realize I only had about 25 minutes, so it's a lot to cover, but I'll try to give highlights on everything. Where the title of this comes from is I like to go to a lot of artificial intelligence presentations and conferences and things like that. And I went to one once, and this woman was a futurist, and she gave some really reasonable explanation of what was going on. And then she ended it, and the robots will take all our jobs. And that's what I see all the time. You go to these artificial intelligence things, and the presenters immediately jump to there'll be job loss. I went to one presentation and the woman said within 3 years, none of us will have jobs. And that was 2 years ago. So I'm not necessarily talking about robots, but I am talking about technology and the possibility of job loss. So first of all, I want to offer a little bit definition of artificial intelligence. And I had students in my class once give they had to find a definition, and I got 12 different definitions of artificial intelligence. If you look out there, there's a lot of definitions that talk about computers thinking for themselves, things like that. But I like this one because it talks about tasks normally requiring human intelligence. And the ones I'd like to highlight are visual perception and decision making. This is what's happening in artificial intelligence now, rather than the robots becoming self-aware, things like that. So what is a robot? And I like this definition. Also, if you look at definitions of robots, you'll see a humanoid figure, just like my starting slide, and that's not what robots are. It's a machine controlled by a computer that is used to perform jobs automatically. And I like that because it is computer-based. So why are we talking about AI now? If I went to a conference 3 or 4 years ago, we weren't talking about AI. What we were talking about is we were talking about big data, but I think AI has grown out of big data. And what big data is you have so much data. We have data from our phones, from our cars, from our refrigerators, the Internet of Things. There is so much data out there, and what are we going to do with it? Another part of AI is we have faster processors, faster CPUs, computers, and we also have more sophisticated algorithms. Machine learning, where the program will create its own data set. We have neural networks, which we can use for recognition of pictures, et cetera, facial recognition, and then just good old-fashioned statistics. Oh, let me talk about big data, and then I want to run a quick poll with you guys. Talking about big data, there's 5 V's to big data. It's volume, just the amount of data, velocity, the speed in which we get it, the types of data, but how truthful is the data? How reliable is this data? And what value can we get out of it? So it's estimated that 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. So of all times, 90% of our data has been created within the last 2 years. Every single day, we do 2.5 quintillion bytes. A byte is approximately a character, but obviously there's a lot more if we're talking about photos and things like that. And then if you look down with the ones and all the zeros, that's quintillion. But I want to do a poll. Let me escape out of here. Okay, this is just, can everybody see the poll? Okay, this is just a quick little poll. I'm asking you, what's your position, professor, administration, or something else? And or think about a job, just any job, and what % of your position can be replaced by technology? And do you think the pandemic will increase or decrease the number of jobs replaced by technology? So I'll just give you a minute to finish that up.
I can't vote, Donna.
What?
I can't vote as a co-host, I think.
Oh, no. Okay, so I've got 17 out of 20. That anybody else still going? Okay, so I'm going to end the polling, and I'm actually going to save this. So here's the results. Most of us are professors. One person put 100%, 50%, 25%, 10%. So it looks like 25% is pretty close. And most people think that the pandemic will increase or decrease the number of jobs created. So let me just save this so I can refer to it later. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so I talked about big data, but this is what I see people do. So we get all this data. This data is hard to interpret, and there's analytical software out there, but there certainly aren't programs at this point that can think for themselves. And then people hear about machine learning and artificial intelligence, which I kind of think is misnamed anyway. And then there's this huge jump to robots are going to take over our job. And, I see it over and over in there. Certainly, and I don't want to disregard this field, because I think that there are a lot of people who are concerned about this, especially job loss, especially the economists. But I think we need to talk about it now before our computers do become more sophisticated. So this is a field called technological job loss, and it's job loss due to technical advances, whether it's the robots or AI or whatever. And the other terms for this are very dire: end of work, a jobless future, a post-human future technological unemployment. But there was a study done by the Vatican a few years ago that says much of the unemployment in the world today is from technology. And 60% of all occupations have activities that can be 30% automatable. And the nature of work is definitely changing, and we can see that. There's several polls. One is technological builders and analysts. I think that's basically computer programmers. 48% see robots replacing jobs. And what's different nowadays is it's not just blue collar job, it's not just manufacturing jobs. We can able to make decisions which go into white collar jobs. A 2015 research, and this is just the general population, predict that 65% of jobs will be done by robots, computers, AI within the next 50 years, and 80% predict that their own jobs won't exist. But what's interesting is Gallup did a poll in 2017, and they said within 5 years, 13% were likely or somewhat likely to lose their jobs. So think about that. That was 2017. It's only 2 years from now. In the next 20 years, 26% that they were likely or somewhat likely to lose their jobs. But in a more recent poll, people only thought 23% thought that they worry about losing their job to robots. And that seems like a small number, but think about that. 23% of the people polled predict that their jobs could be done by robots. I don't know what the question was, so I don't know how to handle that. But recent examples of AI, I mean, obviously everybody knows about the self-driving cars. Because of the recognition, being able to recognize objects in the road, that's what makes self-driving cars possible. Visual recognition devices, being able to look at faces, etc. An ATM is an AI. Uber, and now probably more likely Uber Eats, is run by AI. Amazon is big into that. I had a student who was a farmer, and all the tractors have AI technology that helps, keeping them straight within the fields. And a simple example is email. Your spam filter is an example. Or if you even if you search Google, that's an example of AI. Now, it's not all that our jobs are going to be replaced. It's that data analytics, again, and data-driven decision-making. I like the term augmented decision-making. So, for example, a physician, will a computer replace a physician? I don't know. But if a physician works with an AI system, there's no way that the physician would know about all the studies and all the medications and everything there. But so they can work together, and the things that the physician is strong in, such as looking at the patient or talking to them and saying, maybe this person just is not feeling well. So I really like the term augmented decision making. So are things different this time? Back in the 1800s, the Luddites were revolted against automated weaving looms, and they would go there with their hammers and they would destroy them. But the ironic thing is that there was more jobs created because people could get clothing much cheaper and they had more money to spend on other things. But the fact remains that those weavers did not get their jobs back. So the weavers were out of work, but there was more job creation there. And not every job can be replaced. I'll show you an example down below, but if you require decision-making, if you require working with people, teamwork, those are the jobs that are harder to replace. McKinsey did a study in France, and I forget what year it was. It was fairly recent. And they studied that the internet replaced 500,000 jobs. But in that same time period, 1.2 million jobs were created. So several jobs are gone, but other jobs replace them. My mother-in-law always wondered when we started to pump gas ourselves in Illinois, she wondered, well, what happened to all those people who used to pump gas? For you younger people, it used to be that somebody would run out, pump the gas into your car, take your money and go with that. And she always wondered what happened to all those people. I imagine they got absorbed either into a mini mart or retired or things like that. But there are jobs that will be eliminated. Going back to the 2014 poll of programmers, 52% do not see a future with technological job loss. The other side is almost 50% do see a future. But all of them see new jobs being created, even though old ones are replaced. So we got a lot of challenges in 2020. All of a sudden, we have people who, cannot go to work. It's dangerous to go to work. And many jobs were replaced, eliminated. For example, I take the toll road in every day, and they no longer have people there. They used to have 4 or 5 people, and then over the years it would be down to 1, but there's no people at the toll booths anymore. Will these jobs be replaced once the pandemic is over? I don't know. The jobs in 2020 that are most likely to be replaced are those that cannot be done remotely. The lower level jobs will be replaced first. And the question is, will any type of job loss be permanent? Other questions is how long will the recovery take? And since we're, just in the midst of the pandemic, it's kind of hard to tell what will happen. So here's some challenges. The jobs least likely to be mechanized are leadership, team building, and creativity. So if you do any of that in your job, at this point, human beings cannot do that. As machines become more available, the softer skills, people skills, are going to be much more important. So what can we do to help when the inevitable? Training, training, training. We need to train people to get other jobs, different jobs, and they need to be trained before their jobs are eliminated. Do not underestimate the resistance to change. People are going to fight this back and forth. I have taught at a community college where several people, had been laid off, and they're part of a training program, and they hate it. They absolutely, positively hate it. We also have to look at every job as a socio-technical system. So part of it is human beings, part of it is automation, and how do we work together? Artificial intelligence will change the way managers make decisions, going back to that augmented decision making. And what we can do is do not compete against the machine, but compete with the machine. So we can bring strength where the machines are weak, and where we are weak, we can bring in machines to help us. So leaders or people that can adapt their workforce and redefine their work will have an advantage over those who just stand by. Other things in this field, is this real or is this an exaggeration? Has this always happened? Will there be new jobs to replace what we have? There's been a lot of talk about basic income guarantee. I think Andrew Yang made that part of his bid for running for president, that everybody should have a basic income, $1,000, I think in his case, $1,000 a month. There's been a lot of talk about this, that because of technology is out there, that it isn't eliminating some of our lower level jobs. How will these new technologies be taxed? If people are not going to be working, how are we going to generate income? And will there be subsidies, etc.? But I come back to, now is the time to talk about the issues. We don't have computers that can take over the world and things like that, but now is the time to talk about it. For example, AI in warfare. There's been a lot of tech people who have said we need to control this right now. So I think this is the time to talk about it. So back from the survey that you did, so teaching professionals, I went to this BBC site and it's kind of funny. It says, will the robots take over your job? And I think this is the percentage. So I have teaching professionals, higher education teaching professionals, and I think this is the likelihood that a job could be 100% replaced by technology or a robot. And 3%, because we have to negotiate, help and assist others, and come up with original ideas. And those of you who's had management or administration, you're still pretty low at 25%, but 25% of managers can be replaced with artificial intelligence or robotics. So a little bit safer. So thank you very much. I'm not sure what my time is, but I think Kwan is here. But if you want more information, Dr. Kwan is teaching CSCI 310, Introduction to Artificial Intelligence, in the spring. You might enjoy that. I don't know if you're going to send some of the, but I have references and more reading on there. I'd really like you to share any of your thoughts. We have some tech people here, or economists too. This is a big area for financial people. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'd appreciate your thoughts.
Faster than expected presentation.
What? You thought it'd be about the robots?
Okay, guys, we can take questions. Amy, do you have a question? You're muted, Amy. Any questions?
Kwan, do you want to talk about your class a little bit?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Donna, I might ask a question. So what do you expect about the speed of transformation in technology in the coming decade? I mean, are you expecting more or less the same trend, or are you expecting a faster trend in the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
I would expect it would be greater. I read something, it was not in the paper. I didn't put in there, and I'm not remembering it correctly. But as far as job loss, anytime we have a recession, which we're kind of in right now, that technology just shoots up. I really think that there's going to be a lot of changes. I do not think AI is quite where a lot of people think it is. It is not computers thinking for themselves at this point, but with able to recognize photographs. And that's something that it couldn't do 4 or 5 years ago. Being able to recognize, is this a wolf or is this a dog? Things like that. That was impossible years ago. So I think it's going to be very, very quick. I think we're going to see self-driving cars very quickly. But I mean, it's still not perfect. It's far from perfect. There's still a lot of mistakes. But I think it'll be very, very quick.
Thank
you. Donna, I have a question. This is Kyle. I don't know much about it, but I remember hearing about Facebook's photo identification AI, and there was a settlement, right? Do you have opinions about that? Can you tell us about that at all?
I know about that. Facebook and somebody else closed down their facial recognition because they were afraid that it was going to be used by law enforcement incorrectly. The facial recognition is not perfect. There's been several reports of people who look very, very similar. Who knows what's going to happen with the masks? I mean, I can barely recognize my students with all the masks on. But yeah, I think it was Facebook, and I don't know who else. I can't remember who else, but they shut down their facial recognition services completely, which is, there's been several studies where they showed that the facial recognition is not 100%. And I think they were afraid that law enforcement would use it to arrest somebody that looked similar to somebody else. So.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where I normally hear AI in the news is when it hits some kind of ethical question, right?
Yeah.
Like we have all this data, we're training machines to understand it better, and it always sounds really exciting until someone says, "Well, wait a minute, what about this?" And it leaves me unsure what to think about some things. You know, I love being able to go to Google Photos and say, "Yes, these are the ones of me," and then if I need a picture of me, I can just search my name and find it. Like and I like that on Facebook too, but I don't always stop and think, wait, what's the deeper problems here I should be thinking about? So it feels very appropriate for a liberal arts university to be asking the question.
Yeah.
We need the ethical side as well as the tech side.
Exactly. And I'm a computer science person, but my PhD is in organization development, which is more social science related. And at first people said, well, why are you getting into this? Why are you getting into organization development? Well, I think it fits perfectly with computer science because I went to a presentation once and I talked to the guy who was presenting and I said, what do you think we need in some of these new technologies? And he said, humanity, humanity, humanity. We need to have people to look at this stuff and say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. This isn't fair. This isn't ethical. And I think there's a lot of that. So, you know, even for a liberal arts college or people in the social science, I think there's a lot of opportunities for this, actually.
Hi, it's Stephanie. I have a question about language translation as one of the major categories that you're interested or that AI could help with. I'm working on some Italian and I find that this is just Google Translate, that if I'm asking a simple translation, often a substitution of a word, believe it or not, I'm reading Pinocchio. So, and it's not that easy. So-and-so is carrying a pot. And you know carry and you know so-and-so, but you don't know the word for pot. Well, it'll do very well there. But for idiomatic expression, it doesn't do any better than I do. Yeah. It comes up with a literal translation of the string of words, but not the meaning of the expression. And of course, that's the hard part. So it just may be that Google Translate is where it is, and other forms are more advanced. But where do you see in general the AI work on word transition?
Well, I don't know much about that, but I think like any AI, you know, like I said at the very beginning, people are like, oh, you know, computers are thinking for themselves, everything's perfect, everything's wonderful. But you and Kyle just brought up that, you know, there's a lot of issues. I mean, there is a lot of progress, but we're certainly not there yet. I don't know anything about translation software. You know, I do use Google Translate for the few times I need to translate something, and it's fine, but can you really use it, you know, as a translator on your phone? I don't know. I'm thinking that there's probably a lot of progress that needs to be made there.
Thanks.
Have you used anything except Google Translate? Has anybody ever used any of those apps on your phone, like if you travel? I've never used one, so I don't know.
Based on my experience, Google Translator gives us, you know, the higher accuracy than other applications. And theoretically, the translator will take over the interpreter job, because the best case scenario is to train, you know, we have 5 billion or 6 billion people living all over the world. So if it is possible to train everyone's, you know, accent, intonation, vocabulary, everything, then the Google or any other big company can make a perfect translator app.
And you know, that's I don't think I have an accent, but I have a very strong Midwestern accent, and some of those, if I'm talking on the phone, they can't understand me. That's what I found. So I think Kwan's right that, you know, you have to handle the accents, you have to handle the pronunciation. I think there's a long way to go there, but there's some hopeful signs. I mean, there's some really cool software out there.
Donna, may I add a couple of economist's point of view.
Please, please.
Yeah, there is a professor at MIT whose name is Darren Asamoah. I was just like trying to find his paper while in the last couple of minutes. I can share a screenshot if you want to. He is maybe I should. Let me see. Okay, so this is the conclusion of his paper. Donna Asamoah. Let me show his name first. So he is from MIT, if I'm not mistaken. So this was he has two main conclusions. So he basically says that one more robot per 1,000 workers reduces the employment to population ratio by about 0.18 and 0.34 percent points, and wages by 0.25 or 0.5%. And this is an interview at New York Times. He was basically saying these two paragraphs. I'm going to read it. Quote, the conclusion is that even if overall employment and wages recover, there will be losers in the process, and it's going to take a very long time for these communities to recover. If you have worked in Detroit for 10 years, you don't have the skills to go into the healthcare, he said. The market economy is not going to create jobs by itself for those workers who are bearing the brunt of the change. So basically, this is the general, he's the top expert on this area among economists. He is basically saying that, yes, there will be new jobs created, but these new jobs won't be good fit for maybe old guys. I mean, I'm not talking in terms of ages. I'm talking, so if you spend like 20 years in academia, you can't switch to, I don't know, banking or from car industry to healthcare, etc. So there will definitely be new jobs, but the new jobs will be good fit for newly trained people. So as you said, train. So you have to train yourselves. If some jobs are lost, I'm kind of like evaluating his point. If some jobs are lost in academia, for example, of course, there will be some. I mean, the classes are recorded. There are tons of free classes which are recorded. Stanford has Coursera, MIT has Open Coursera, whatever. It's every single university. So if we don't train ourselves, for example, for new technology, yes, there will be some job losses. That's the general tendency among economists.
Well, and can you train a coal miner to be a computer scientist? And are there jobs for computer scientists where a coal miner, I mean, there's a lot, I mean, again, this is your field, not mine, but it's just not, you know, going back to 500,000 jobs were lost, but 1,200 were created. You can't just take those 500 people and move them over to the 12 or 1.2 million that are created. There's hurt, and it's going to be, I think we need to plan ahead too. If we know that an industry is dying, we need to, or people in that industry need to be training people to do something else. Like I said, I've taught at a community college, and we had retraining. Well, you cannot turn people into a computer programmer if they don't want to be a computer programmer. I mean, it's just, people either love it or they hate it. You know, that's the way it goes. So yeah, these are the kind of things I think we need to be discussing now. There's a few people in here who are, you know, technical computer people. Kwan or Gail, anything that you've seen in AI that I've missed? Kwan, do you think computers are thinking for themselves yet?
Thinking not perfectly, but
No.
yeah, not perfectly, but they, you know, start thinking by itself.
They're getting there, but not quite.
Not quite.
Yeah. Gail is the web designer here. She's also one of my students, but you said Gail, you go to a lot of AI conferences or have gone.
I've just been to one, but I think I don't know that people really understand the amount of AI that's within technology and in our society. I mean, we're all aware that Google is running on AI, and Facebook, social media in general, all the advertising is based on AI algorithms. But it is everywhere. We've got, I recently heard about an employee who works at Amazon, and they are required to wear their face masks in that factory. And she said if there's cameras all over, and if that camera catches her entire face 3 times, her boss gets notified and she gets a talking to because she's had her face mask off her face. That's AI. It's everywhere and it's throughout everything now, but to the degree of the sophistication, but also to the degree of human error. I mean, we all know that there's been websites that have been hacked and information that's been stolen, banks that have been hacked. So, you know, you've got a lot of components to it, but it's all over.
It is. And, you know, going back to the human side of it, there was a famous study that some people quote as an example of AI, and I can't remember who did it. It might have been Amazon, but they gave example of wolves and husky dogs. And they said, you know, and they showed, okay, this AI identified this as a husky. They identified this as a wolf. And they asked AI, people who work in AI, would you trust this software? And, you know, a huge portion said, yeah, this software is great. I mean, it's almost 100% accurate. Well, what the software was actually looking at was looking at snow in the background. So if there was snow in the background, it was a wolf. If there was no snow in the background, it was a husky dog. And they purposely set that up to say, you know, you can't trust this stuff yet. You have to look beyond, you know, what's there, because they missed one picture and it was a husky sitting in the snow. So the AI program said that it was a wolf. So
I'm sorry.
yeah, there's a lot of things out there that I think we need to approach carefully.
Stella, do you have a question?
I work in a hospital, and I felt very uncomfortable and had to really help get it out of my head that I was being tracked every place I went to within the hospital. If I was outside a patient's, or if I was in a patient's room, it would monitor how long I was in that room for. And in the beginning, it was very scary. After a while, I sometimes used to walk twice as fast, thinking, I wonder if this thing can keep up with me, you know. Just played little games like that just to really entertain myself. But I more or less had to get it out of my head that I am being tracked every place that I go.
Why are they tracking you? Do you know?
One of the reasons was they said that patients will do surveys, and they'll say, my nurse never came to see me. Well, this way they could document what nurses saw them and for how long of a time and how many times they saw them on a shift. Is that the real reason for it? I don't know. Probably will never know.
That's amazing. And, you know, there's a lot of that in every field. I mean, they can track you through your phone. That's part of the information that's saved, geographical information. You know, what are we going to do with that? I don't know.
How many times have we had a conversation with somebody and then opened our phone to find an ad regarding what we were talking about?
Allegedly, they say that they don't do that, but I've tried that with classes. We haven't been successful. You know, we said, okay, everybody turn up your phone, and I would write on the board, we're going to talk about this. And we've never been successful in getting it to do it. They said that that's a myth, but I don't know. Sometimes you talk about something and you don't even search it on the internet, and it appears on your computer. So yeah, I agree with you.
Try it with the mention of purchasing something that you want to buy. That's where it's going to pick you up.
Yeah.
Isn't there
And
something?
I think that speaks really to how complex some of the data people have about us. I was talking to a good friend who works in some computer science capacity, and he was saying that it's less about the Mike heard you say it, and more that you have so many data points that make you the kind of person who is likely to have searched for that. And it sometimes seems very much like those are the same. Like you said, it's hard to know if it's a myth or not. And I've gone back and forth on what I think is happening, but it is intriguing when you start thinking about all the different ways that they can predict exactly what I'm going to do based on the knowledge that I've openly given them. You know, that I had the choice of doing.
Wasn't there something too, Donna, with Target in their advertising with AI, that there was some sort of, I don't know if it was a lawsuit or something for privacy, where they were using AI for spending and sent, I think, a targeted ad for pregnancy to a young girl whose father received it, and it turned out it was true, and they predicted it before she was able to, know herself.
Yeah, I saw that study. That I don't know if she was searching for stuff, on Target's website, but it wasn't necessarily, I don't know, she was just searching for stuff that could have been pregnancy related. And it actually was her dad's computer or something. And I remember that study.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's a big privacy thing. That's a huge privacy problem.
And Kelly,
So,
did you have a question earlier? I thought I saw your hand raised too.
Yeah, me too, right?
I did actually, but it wasn't very connected to what this thread was, and it was so fascinating, I took my hand down. But I was anecdotally going to refer to the fact that over my lifetime, I've moved in and out of fields. There was a time when I was working in the graphic arts industry, and I was pen and ink illustrator before CAD. And so I was doing all of the exploded break drawings and that detailed pen and ink work that you would need for industry. And as the automation started to come forth and the CAD programming came forth, it was putting illustrators like myself out of business in that thread. And so we had to we used to laugh as artists that we were like old cowboys in a movie where they were shooting at our feet and we had to keep dancing to stay viable. And even now as a visual artist, in my second hat, I have people saying, well, now you might as well really hang it up because the phones can turn any photograph into a watercolor looking image or any of these variations of manipulation to the image. And it's been sometimes unsettling until you stop and think that, there are ways that we can keep tweaking ourselves to stay viable. But it is unsettling as you watch some technology take away parts that you found or that you thought were very unique about yourself or your skill set. So that was just kind of a side comment that I wanted to throw in there that makes you stop and think about how important it is to kind of keep thinking about it. Like Donna said, keep not just the retooling thinking, but continually think about how you can stay relevant. And
that would be a really interesting talk, Kelly. Can computers replace the arts? I mean, obviously something, if I had a picture, I can turn it into a watercolor, and they've had studies where they actually had, tell the computer, draw a tree, and, the computer will do something. But yeah, if you're an illustrator, yeah.
There was a time when I was being told, well, we certainly wouldn't ever need an artist to hand draw something anymore because there is, like Volk would have their clip art available. And I finally had to say to a client, well, you're certainly welcome to use the clip art, but by the way, I also work for Volk Clip Art. So who do you think makes those silly little drawings that you steal and pop into your brochures anyway? So it is kind of a dichotomy. And at what point might we be put out of business? And yet, isn't there always that, what I'd like to call that spiritual element that would always leave a room for an artist? So
I think that's a good point. That's a good consideration. Just a couple things. Orhan put a couple links about what we were talking about as far as the computers hearing you. And somebody else had a question. Diane, did you have a question?
Oh, I was just going to share that we have a car that has an auto drive feature, and at my age, it's really hard to trust, and that is important. You mentioned the idea of trusting, and there are issues you have to think about, when you're doing that. But then I saw on the news about a young man, not an older person like myself, in one of the cars that fell asleep and let the car just take him where he wanted to go. So, the training and trust, and if you are raised with it, then it's going to be easier. So we're probably like the transition generation, willing to try, but very suspicious compared to the younger people that will be raised with it and learn how to use it and how to make it their own. And one thing for your artist, my daughter was a scientific illustrator. I think she was the last one that graduated with that major at Northern Illinois. And like the next day, the computer took over. And so now she's a scientific illustrator on a computer. She had to retrain herself, took her stippling away,
That's
Yeah.
true. There was a point at which that transition, and suddenly I was sitting at a computer all day playing with Quark and Adobe and all of those new programming. And that's about the time I walked away from the industry, at least that component, and discovered higher ed and library work. So it all worked out perfectly in the end.
Yeah, well, yeah, their benefit, I'm sure.
Any more questions, comments?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So this is it's like the other side of the coin of the conversation that we've been having with here with Kelly and Diane's comments. I just had a class randomly, we're on the technology chapter in my conversation class. It's an intermediate Spanish conversation class. And the question I posed to my students, and I had them discuss in small groups, was to imagine a future in which machines would do things that at this point are unthinkable. And the things that they came up, they had to come up with specific examples, and they came up with things like, I want to press a button and have a machine do my homework, and set a table and feed my dog and clean the house. And then other things like, a machine that you could press a button and it could detect cancer on your body, in your body, right? And another one that could cure disease just with the press of a button. And then another student actually said, I don't want to have a machine do what I can do now or anything. I like doing things on my own. But all of this discussion among 18 and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds made me think that, and think of examples of like a 4-year-old nephew showing me, how to increase the volume and lower the volume on some computer, iPad, or something like that. And so my question has to do with what the generational aspect of this is, and how the fact that our young kids in elementary school are growing up with this as part of their language of engagement with the world. Does it make what we're imagining kind of be out of step with what they're going to come up with? I don't know if that's a well-formed question, but I kind of feel like they're going to be this is such a part of who they are right now, that they're going, I found myself in my class saying a couple of things at a couple of points, like, you can invent that machine. You can work on it if you go into this industry or that. So I don't know if you have any comments about that, Donna, or anyone else.
Well, I have a 7-month-old grandson, 7 months, who can take a selfie of himself. And my daughter holds up the phone, he smiles and clicks the button. And he's going to grow up in a world. I mean, most of us probably have difficulty taking a selfie of ourselves, but he's going to grow up in a world that this is not going to be strange. He's going to grow up in a world of self-driving cars, and he's going to trust them. I think it's different. I mean, my students, Nikia and some of my younger students, their world is much different than what I grew up. And, I'm a computer science person. But I think technology is going to be just a given, and it's not going to be a shock to a lot of people. I don't know. That's just my theory. Something that may scare me, not going to scare my kids or my grandkids at all.
What I was thinking too was in terms of the amount of creativity involved in inventing and engineering new machines. Like that's an element that is a beautiful, you know, very humanities, liberal arts kind of way of thinking of the invention of technology. You can't imagine a new machine if you're not imagining outside of what you know, right? Or based on what you know or something like that. And so that creativity and that curiosity doesn't go away just because we have machines that take care of things that we did ourselves before.
Well, I don't know. I see a lot of things with futurists. And this one woman said, well, there's no computer programs anymore. Programs just write themselves. And I just said, oh, that's my field. But, you know, what do you think is going on in the West Coast? What do you think is going on with Facebook and Google and Amazon? I mean, it's all technology, it's all programming. So I think what a lot of people think of AI is the computers are just doing it themselves, but it isn't. I mean, they have hundreds of thousands of millions of programmers who are actually writing the code. And, you know, Nakia and Gail, who are my students, you know, they're using C++, they're using Python. I mean, they're using the code that we are learning at this institution to write some of these things. That's how they write the self-driving cars. That's how they program some of that. So, I mean, programming has not gone away, but I think some people think that, okay, well, this stuff is just happening by itself, and it really doesn't. And going back to our ethical consideration, I mean, there's some thought, you know, is there bias in code? You know, as a woman programmer, do I program differently than a male programmer might program? I mean, there's a lot of interesting studies out there that I think it's well open. So interesting. So Marilyn, your students do think they're going to design stuff, or they don't?
I was encouraging them to. We'll see. I don't know what they think yet, but I want them to think in those terms, because I do think it takes imagination and creativity. But,
oh, exactly.
I would have to say absolutely endorse that, because creativity, whether it's the arts, it's music, it's poetry, it's language, the things that we count on that make us creative people are the things that are behind all of the technology.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
sometimes when I have felt discouraged, thinking that eventually the students of today maybe won't go out into the woods and won't go into history or go into the arts. And I'm a historical reenactment enactor. And when I'm out doing these events, I was worried that it was a dying hobby, and have in fact discovered that there's whole new generations now who are immersed in technology and the modernity kind of, but they look forward to those disconnect moments when they can go out and experience and do the forest bathing in our historical context. So I don't think we should be discouraged. If anything, as long as we can keep encouraging that kind of connection between the creativity and the technology, it will only help all of our generations to continue to grow and develop.
And I think there's a place for that. I mean, I don't know how you do that, but I think there's a place for the social sciences, for the arts, for music, in some of this computer development. You know, I tell my students, you know, when you play a video game, there's music there. There's people who write that music. There's people who have to design the characters, have to design the avatars. I mean, not just on, but any type of artificial intelligence we have, any type of app we have, you need a really diverse team of people to be working on that.
I think we need to wrap up the discussion, if that's okay for you, Donna.
Yes, thanks everybody. I really appreciate your discussion. I think this topic is really open to a lot of different viewpoints. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you everyone for joining us
Thank
today.
you, Donna.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Donna.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was interesting.